Action bits. Action bits.
Today we're going to jump into identifying duplicates in your data. So for part one, we're going to do a visual data inspection. Part two, we're going to identify duplicates by using SQL. And part three, we're going to identify duplicates using Tableau. You can follow along at home by utilizing the sample superstore data brought to you by Tableau. So to start, I like to take a look at the data in something like Excel. And I also like to focus immediately on IDs. IDs are usually an indicator of how to identify the primary identifier or primary key. So here we see that the row ID is essentially just a row count of every row in this data set. The order ID lets me know what a distinct order is, customer ID, distinct customer, and product ID, the individual product. So by using this and looking at this data, I then like to put them into categories. So here I can visually inspect the order ID and see that indeed they are grouped together. There's multiple products per order ID. There's multiple orders per customer. And then everything at the product ID level is where the measures are identified. So sales, quantity, discount, and profit are all at the product ID level. So by looking at this, I would assume that each row is that combination of order ID, customer ID, and product ID. One way I like to double check this is utilizing SQL. So I'm going to jump into SQL here in my dbeaver instance, and I'm going to focus on this set of code here to start with. So what I'm doing is I'm going to select and then group by order ID, customer ID, product ID from my data set, which in this case is called sample. But you'll notice something potentially slightly different. I'm utilizing having. So this having function allows me to see if there's any rows that have a count greater than 1 of that combination of order ID, customer ID, and product ID, which I assumed my level of detail was at. Now here, it returned 11 records. So this combination of order ID, customer ID, and product ID actually has 2 rows associated with which is something that was somewhat unexpected. Now if I look at this next query, you'll see that it includes nested within it the original query, except that I'm doing a join to the original data source so I can see each individual value and potentially what the issue might be, or if there is an issue within the data set. So by executing this code, again, it's doing that inner join, that query that I ran before, and I'm matching it to the entire data set based on those keys, and I ordered by the customer name. And here, if I kind of visually look through the data, I do see something that's a little strange. So here, I have this hand-finished solid wood document frame with sales of 101 and 12 cents, a quantity of 8. And then right below it, I see the same entry at the product ID for 68.46 for a quantity of 2. And I also see that there's no discount associated with it. That price per item doesn't seem to add up. So this might trigger some sort of indication, some sort of warning. Maybe I need to go back to the operations person and try to identify if this is truly representative of what's happening in our business place or if it's a greater issue. But by utilizing that in SQL, I'm easily able to identify any duplicates in the data. So we can do the same thing in Tableau. Let's build it out together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out my order ID to rows, and I'm going to bring out my customer ID to rows. I'm going to bring out product ID again to rows. And I'm simply going to grab order count and put that on my text. And for almost everyone, I see that there's 1 per that combination, except down here there's 2. Now instead of visually going through and identifying these, I'm going to utilize the filter within Tableau, bring that up to my filter, and I want it to where it's at least 2. Okay, so here I see that 11 row count, like I saw before, utilizing SQL. But in this case, if I want to bring out row ID with the way I have it, everything's going to disappear because my level of detail changed and this count changed. Now, if I want to do further analysis and dive into it much like I did in SQL, I would need to leverage a fixed LOD expression. And that's what I did here. So here is the fixed LOD I built in order to replicate that scenario by fixing the level of detail on order ID, customer ID, and product ID, doing my count of row ID. I am then able to replicate that situation. I see my 11 rows, I have my duplicate values, and now when I bring row ID out, it successfully does it. The visualization is there. All is right in the world. I could then look at my sales in quantity and do further analysis on it. So join me next time for another action bit. I'm Jeremy Paytas, and I'll talk to you later.
Action Bits.